Hello and welcome to Exam Revision, and in today's video we're going to look at the different factors which affect supply. And our learning intentions today are that we are going to name and differentiate between different factors other than price which affect supply, and we are going to explain how each of these factors does have an influence on supply. So there are a number of factors other than price that can affect supply, and the factors other than price which can affect supply are weather conditions, the prices of related goods, production and development costs, technology, government charges that you might have on your product, the number of suppliers that there are of that product, and the expectations of sellers. And we will look at each of these individually today. Okay, so the first factor that we will look at is the impact that weather conditions can have on supply. And weather conditions are the impact that weather has on the supply of crops available. So, for example, if you had a particularly wet summer or a particularly dry winter, this could reduce the wheat harvest. And this will have an impact on the supply of bread, pasta, and different things which come from wheat. And this would shift the demand curve to the left. It would have a reduction in the amount of these products which were supplied. Okay, so this is how weather can have an impact, because for crops they need certain types of weather in order for them to grow efficiently, and if they don't get those weather conditions, well then that's going to reduce the amount of products which can be made or supplied from that crop. And in this case obviously we looked at wheat. So the next factor that we will look at is the influence of the price of related goods. And what this is the impact that changes in the price of substitute and complementary goods can have on the supply of a product. So for example, here we have Adidas runners and Nike runners, and an increase in the price of Adidas trainers will decrease their demand, and this would also increase the demand for the Nike trainers, and this would mean that Nike would have to then supply more trainers to meet this demand, so therefore their supply would increase. And similarly, a decrease in the price of Adidas trainers will increase the demand for Adidas trainers. Okay, so this is how the price of a related good can have an influence on your supply. The next one that we will look at are production and development costs. So this is the impact that business costs will have on supply. So how much it costs to produce and develop a product. And all businesses will have these costs, okay? So all businesses will have costs such as wages, material, and manufacturing costs. And what we can say about these is that, in general, the higher these costs are for a business, the lower their supply will be. Because if you have really high wage costs and your materials cost you lots of money, and it costs lots of money to run the machines in order to make your product, well then you're going to have less money left in order to pay for being able to supply the product, to actually pay for the creation of the product and for the product to be supplied. However, if these costs are lower, that would mean you would have an increase in your supply. So if the costs of your wages are low and your materials are low, that would allow you then to supply more of the product, because you would have more finances in order for you to make more of this product. So the next one which we will look at is the impact that technology has on supply. So in general, we can say that technology usually makes a business more efficient and reduces costs in the long term. And an example of this would be seen in car production. So the reason why this is relevant is because back when cars first began to be made, you used to have one or two people who would construct the entire car from start to finish, and it used to take a long time to create a car. But then improvements in technology and specifically using a conveyor belt meant that you could have different people at different stages of the conveyor belt, all attaching different parts to the car. And it made the whole process a lot more efficient, and it meant that more cars could be produced. So, therefore, using that example, we can see how technology would make a business more efficient and in the long term could reduce costs. So, similarly, we can also say that decreased costs can increase supply. So the next factor which we will look at is the influence that government charges can have on supply. And specifically within this, we're going to look at the impact that taxes and quotas will have on supply. And if you're wondering what a quota is, we have a definition of it over here. So we can see that a quota is a limit made on the number of a certain good which are available for sale. And an example of that can be seen down at the bottom. So for example, there is a quota set by the EU on the fishing industry, which means that there's only so much fish which are allowed to be caught each year by Irish fishermen. So that's an example of a quota. Legally, fishermen are only allowed to they're only allowed to catch a certain amount of fish every year. So that's an example of a quota. And typically what we can say that higher taxes and higher quotas will increase costs and reduce supply, and similarly lower taxes will decrease costs and increase supply, because again that reduces the costs for the business and allows them to produce more of the item. And now we will look at the impact that the number of suppliers has on the supply of a product. And what we mean by the number of suppliers is the impact that the amount of suppliers has on the supply in a market. And if we have more suppliers in a market, supply will increase and prices will fall. And that's quite easy to understand. What that's saying is basically the more different companies that we have producing or supplying the same product, the more of that product there will be supplied. And this will also see the flip on of a decrease or a fall in prices. And an example of that is how the introduction of phone manufacturers such as Huawei and OnePlus, that decreased the prices of phones in the Android market. So that's why lots of Android phones for a really good phone can be quite cheap. That's because there's so many of those phones in the supply chain. There's lots of those being supplied into that market. And that means that the different manufacturers have to drop their prices in order for them to be competitive, and so that people will buy their product in that market. And the last one that we will look at are the expectations of sellers. And the expectations of sellers is the impact that sellers' expectations will have on supply. So, for example, if sellers expect that prices will rise, what they may do is they may hold back some of their stock to sell it for the higher price at a later stage. So even though they have the product in stock, they won't distribute it because they're going to wait for the price to rise so that when they do sell it, it will increase their profits. And similarly, if they expect that prices are going to drop soon, well then they will sell all of their remaining stock really, really quickly so that they can get it at the higher price before the price drops. So, for example, if we were to look at winter coats in the months of February and March, when they're about to see maybe a reduction in price because less people will be buying them, they might try and sell all of their stock really, really quickly so that they can sell them at that higher price before the price will drop. All right, so thanks a million again for tuning in today. Hopefully this video improved your knowledge of how different factors affect supply. Our learning intentions for today were that we were going to name and differentiate between different factors other than price which affect supply, and we were able to do that. And our second one was to be able to explain how each of these factors has an influence on supply, and I think our knowledge of that has improved also. So thanks a million for tuning in today. As I said, make sure to stay up to date with all our social medias for more information. Thanks a million and have a nice day.